it would, rise. There's a delay here called latent period. It would rise and then it would relax after some time. What causes the rise is basically the release and diffusion of calcium ions. Those calcium ions would then bind onto troponin, move tropomyosin out of the way, kind of revealing the actin chain of thin filaments, and the myosin heads can then do their power strokes and do their cross-bridge cycling, right? And then as calcium is being taken back up into the SR by the calcium ATPases, then, the tropomyosin will then slowly start covering up these actin myosin chains. Myosin heads won't do their cross-bridge cycling, and then you have that relaxation, this release of tension, basically. That's what makes up a twitch, right? So, given that, if this was our normal twitch, what's going to happen when we increase calcium ATPase? What's going to happen to our single twitch? Yes?
Get weaker, the tension would get lower.
Yeah, the tension would get lower. What else would happen to the twitch?
Would it freeze?
Hmm?
Would it freeze?
Would it freeze? What would happen? So yeah, you get weaker tension. What about the duration of the twitch? Would it be longer, the same, shorter? Shorter, right? So you'll get something that looks something like this, right? It's not as strong, and it's shorter too, right? And it's because calcium, though it's being released, it's being taken really quickly. So calcium ions don't have that chance to diffuse and intercalate with all the myofibrils, right? It's just released and then pulled right back in. Right? Whereas calcium ATPases are always working; they're never stopping. And so you don't have the time to build up to the high tension that you normally did, and it also ends sooner because this calcium ATPase is taking up all that calcium ion back into the SR. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to be running out of space soon, but let's do the second one. So, troponin's affinity. So that was what binds calcium. Let's assume this is not happening anymore. That's a separate condition. We're not combining conditions here. What happens to your twitch here? Would you have seen greater tension? Would it be a longer duration? What's going to happen? Someone else. Yes? Be a greater tension. Why?
Because it's doing the post-stroke
Mm-hmm.
when the calcium binds to the
Okay. Would you think, so what creates tension exactly? So tropomyosin's moving out of the way, right? And then the myosin heads get to do the work, right? And the myosin power stroke is what, the cross-bridge cycling is what is creating the tension, right? Is more of that happening? No, not per se, right? Did you have more myosin heads before? No, not really. So you won't really see an increase in tension because you're not going to have necessarily more cross-bridge cycling. Now, if you can somehow innervate more if you have more myosin heads or somehow you had more myofibril, then you would see more tension. But assuming those are all the same, you're not going to see more cross-bridge cycling. But what else would change?
Would it be longer though because the troponin's keeping the tropomyosin out of the way?
Yeah, so what would be longer? What would be longer?
The duration.
So the duration would be longer, right? So not only would the duration be longer, but the contraction would be faster too, right? If this was the normal rate, it'd be much faster, right? And so it'd extend out, and then it'd look something more like this, right? It would last longer. It would get to that maximum amount of tension. It would hold it longer because that troponin is binding to that calcium and it's sticking on. So not only does it bind quickly, so you get a faster increase in tension, but it stays there longer too. So your duration's going to last longer, right? So longer duration. I don't have space to draw a longer duration.
Would that be like a muscle spasm almost? Or?
Not quite. No. Troponin's affinity doesn't really change unless you have a genetic change or an expression change. Okay, so let's do the last condition. We'll draw it here. So the sarcolemma is another name for cell membrane of the muscle fiber. If that's hyperpolarized, what do you think is going to happen? Duration get longer, shorter, tension get greater, shorter. Would it even happen? Why do we care about the membrane potential of the muscle cell to begin with? Why?
The membrane potential of what?
Of the cell, of the muscle cell. Why do we even care that it's at -70 or it's being hyperpolarized? Do we care? We should care? Why should we care? In order for what? Yeah, right. There's an action potential happening here, right? That's this bit right here, right? There's an action potential. It travels across the cell membrane, travels down the T tubules. That's how we get the release of calcium, right? By having this action potential travel through these T tubules and exciting gates at the sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? And so it matters, right? And so if we hyperpolarize a cell, are we more likely or less likely to have an action potential?
More likely.
Less likely.
Less likely.
Yeah, because if you're hyperpolarized, right? So okay, let's draw our membrane
You're
potential right here.
more
If this was
negative.
-70,
Oh,
this
you're
was the
pushing away from
threshold,
zero.
right? And hyperpolarization puts you in this direction. You're further away from the threshold value, right? So it's harder to have an action potential, right? And so you're less. So essentially, you don't really draw anything here. You're just less likely to have a twitch. That might seem like a trick question, and I probably wouldn't phrase it like that on a test. But I just want I want you guys to think about it, right? These are all. When it comes to skeletal muscle, it's an all or nothing thing. It happens, you have a twitch. If there's no action potential, you're not going to have a twitch. And assuming everything else is constant, that twitch is going to always have the same profile. It's going to have the same duration. It's going to have the same tension. And the only way you're going to change that is a couple ways. One, you mess around with the length tension curve, which we talked about last lecture, or you have multiple excitations in a row, so you can have summative twitches. But assuming neither of those things are happening, then you're always going to have always going to have this idealistic twitch. That's it. All right. So hopefully that made sense. Let's move on to the rest of our lecture. So here I'm just going to review a bit from what we talked about last lecture. So here we're looking at a muscle at the whole organ level, whole muscle and how it contracts. And generally, we can say there are two types of general contractions. So generally we have isotonic contractions. Isotonic contractions here move the load. So literally the load gets to move in this direction. So that's you basically like lifting something like this. You basically, any arm motion you have is a contraction, and if your arm's moving or your body's moving, you can consider that an isotonic contraction. And so when you look at the tension over time of an isotonic contraction, what happens is, the contraction will build up tension and it'll keep constant as it moves the load, and then it will relax. And so the key here is this plateau here. It is basically the same tension as it moves the object. That's why it's called isotonic. So same tension. That's why we call it an isotonic contraction, because you're keeping the same amount of tension as you're moving the load. Now, opposed to that is isometric contractions. Isometric contractions, you notice the load does not move. So the muscle's contracting, but the load's not moving. So that's me trying to lift this heavy table. I'm contracting, I'm trying to lift this table, but the table's not moving though. But you can't deny that I'm trying to contract my muscles though, right? That's still a contraction. The only difference is the load's not moving. So that is an isometric contraction. So you see a similar profile here where you have an increase in tension, plateaus a bit, but then you have a decrease in tension here. And the trick here is we say the tension is varying in an isometric contraction, but the length of the muscle is staying the same. That's why it's called isometric, same length. That's why they have the names isometric and isotonic. Now, we can break isotonic contraction into two categories of contractions. So we have, of the isotonic contractions, we have one called concentric contractions. And then we have another type, what we call eccentric contractions. And both of these involve the muscle to move. So we're still shortening the length. The length is changing, but they're changing in different directions. So for a concentric contraction, the length is decreasing. So for my bicep brachiae, if I'm doing a bicep curl, that's a concentric contraction, right? My bicep brachiae is getting shorter as I'm moving this dumbbell, right? Everyone can understand that one, right? Same thing, if I'm doing an extension, my triceps getting shorter, it is doing a concentric contraction, right? This paper towel roll is very convenient. I didn't place it there. But an eccentric contraction is the opposite. As you contract, oh no, don't screw me up now. Okay, look here. The length increases. And that's kind of a weird thing to think about. The muscle length is increasing, the muscle is getting longer, but it's still contracting. So what's an example of this? An example of this is when you're going down the stairs. Your calves are doing an eccentric contraction, or if ever you've gone hiking and you're going down a slope, your calves are going through an eccentric contraction, right? You put your foot down and then you slowly lower your heel back onto the ground, right? So